Good morning, everybody. Here we are at the start of week 2 of the COP30 climate talks in Belém, Brazil. It was an extremely busy first week, and despite a lot of events, a lot of discussions, and the political guidance that was given by the leaders before the COP actually started, as far as the negotiations go, we ended the first week with still quite a lot of work to do, I think. The agenda fight that some people had expected at the beginning, the Brazilian presidency managed to head that off. And, you know, as a result, there were a lot of consultations going on behind the scenes. And we start week 2 with the ministers coming in, and all to play for still, I think, in terms of working out what results we're going to get from this COP. So in order to unpack a lot of what happened in the first week and looking ahead to the second week, I've got 3 excellent guests with me here this morning. I'm going from my left. I have Juan Carlos Monterrey, who's a Special Representative for Climate Change and National Climate Change Director of the Ministry of Environment of Panama. And then we have Susana Mohammed, who is a former Colombian Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development, who also presided over the COP16 biodiversity talks summit, I should say, in Colombia. And then I have Harjeet Singh, who's the founding director of the Satat Sampada Climate Foundation in India, and also a strategic advisor to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. So thank you very much for coming to discuss the talks with us here this morning. I'm the editor of Climate Home News, and we're following the talks on a daily basis. You can see the bulletins on our website and also sign up for our newsletter. So this is a key point 10 years after the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015. And I think it would be good to start with a recap of what that has meant, these last 10 years of work that has happened under the Paris Agreement. Often people from the outside seem to think that, you know, they hear bad news about climate change, that, you know, we're going to break through the 1.5C limits that was agreed in the Paris Agreement. But on the other hand, I think it's very clear that without the Paris Agreement, we would be in a much, much worse place. So I'd like to get your thoughts, you know, sitting here in COP. Where do you think we've got to with the Paris Agreement, and where do we need to go next? We'll start with you, Juan Carlos.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here with Climate Home News. Definitely the Paris Agreement was a magical moment. It sent a message to the market, and the uptake of renewable energies accelerated. That is something that we cannot take away. However, that is not enough. We're nowhere near where we need to be. If we look at the objective of the convention, if we look at the objective of the Paris Agreement, we're failing. Greenhouse gases are not stabilized in the atmosphere. We're en route to overshoot past 1.5. And the Paris Agreement asked us to do every effort possible to limit temperature warming to 1.5. As of right now, we're not making every effort possible. And we need new signals 10 years after the adoption. And those signals need to come from here, from Belém, from the multi-round decisions that the COP presidency is advancing.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much. I think the world has seen extraordinary change. We experience a pandemic that many trace its origin on climate change itself. We already experienced 2024, which was a year with an average temperature of 1.5 Celsius, and we saw what that meant if that was going to be the new reality, the new environmental context. And also, we advance, as Juan Carlos says, in the part of the process that is bankable, that is financiable because it creates new business. So I think the Paris Agreement has been taken in what I would call a green capitalist logic, but has left behind the most vulnerable communities, has closed itself democratically. The last 3 COPs have not allowed really participation, and we are far from the objectives because what the scientists are saying is that we are heading towards 2.8 Celsius and that the NDCs that were presented here add to reducing 6 gigatons of CO2 when we need to reduce 31 gigatons of CO2 by 2030. So I don't think we can be complacent. I don't think we can say, oh, without it will be worst. No, because that's not the responsibility in such a matter where the life of the planet and humanity is at stake.
Perhaps I was being too kind in that case, Susanna. Thanks for setting me right. Okay. Harjeet, over to you.
Let me build on what Susanna said. 10 years ago, we welcomed Paris with a lot of caution. And half of the world was trying to convince us, saying, you know what, at least we got the direction right. Yes, we have some mechanisms that will help us ratchet up. Look at where we are. We have not. So we were right, saying that no, Paris Agreement is not enough. Of course, it looks into a lot of issues related to mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. But it's too little, too late. And we talked about 1.5 degree as a target, but look at where we are, 1.6 degrees Celsius of warming. And fossil fuel has not been tackled at all. We know that that's the cause of the crisis. And look at Paris Agreement really doesn't deal with it substantively. And we are talking about a space here in Belém where 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists are moving around, right? That's 1 in 25 of all the delegations, and more than the delegations of 10 vulnerable countries put together. So basically, we have welcomed the arsonist, and they are now guiding us how to put out the fire. That's where we are. So there's something dramatically wrong with the process that we have adopted here, and we have allowed this process to be hijacked by polluters, and that has to be called out.
Yep. Okay, over to Juan Carlos, because at the same time, I also wanted to ask you to expand on what you said about the need for this COP to send out signals about where we need to be going.
Yes, absolutely. This conversation got me going about the process, because when we work on domestic policy in our own nations, it is the understanding that one law will not fix it all. We need to develop packages of laws, packages of decrees, packages of resolution on a continuum. They need to get updated, they need to get revised, and all of that. But at the international level, we believe that with the Paris Agreement, that's it. So the same logic that we apply domestically needs to be applied in the international framework. And we need more Paris Agreement-like agreements across specialized agencies of the United Nations. We need it on trade. We need it on maritime issues. We have something already on aviation. But this belief that with just one agreement alone, we're going to fix the biggest issue humanity has ever encountered is just nonsense. It's just insanity. So we definitely need more agreements, more frameworks, because Paris is not going to be enough to take us across the line. And then in terms of the signals that we expect out of this COP, for Panama, we need signals of reason. What are the signals of reasons? We need a strong language on the transition away from fossil fuels. We need a pathway so that we make this transition actually happen. And Colombia, under the leadership of Minister Muhammad, was a first mover on this, you know, an oil-producing country calling out for this. That was incredible. That was fantastic. We also need a pathway to end deforestation globally once and for all. And ultimately, we also need to harmonize processes. We are drowning on paperwork. We always talk about the communities drowning under sea level rise, but bureaucrats like me and Susana, when she was minister, we were drowning on paperwork. We need to develop 45 different reports in a period of 5 years to comply with all environmental conventions. Some of these reports can cost you all the way up to $4 million. Let's do some simple math. Let's assume it's $500,000 for each. It is about 20 million in 5 years that don't go to conservation, that don't go to restoration, and don't go to groups on the ground. So these are the signals that we need out of this COP.
Thank you, and I'll follow up on that with Susanna. But just one thing first, Juan Carlos. I think the presidency here has basically said, you know, there shouldn't be new initiatives, there shouldn't be new agreements, and there shouldn't be new kind of frameworks coming out of these UN climate talks, that we need to implement the ones that we have already. But I think what you're talking about is agreements or frameworks that actually push forward. Yeah. So outside of these negotiations, for example, Susanna, what could be done on the fossil fuel transition away from fossil fuels, for example, under Colombia's leadership? What's the plan that Colombia has for that?
Right. We joined the initiative for non-proliferation of fossil fuel treaty. We consider, and we are experiencing, because we have taken a lot of decisions that are very hard within the current financial, economic, and the logic of the international relations, like stopping exploration contracts, not signing more exploration contracts, taking out the subsidies for gasoline, and also half of the subsidies for diesel. And also, we are working towards declaring the Amazon a fossil fuel non-proliferation zone, so that the frontier of extraction, we have to stop the frontiers of extraction. But the reality is that the production plans that are underway in countries are 120% more than compatible with 1.5. So it is a lie that because we are developing renewables, we are stopping climate change. Because what we're doing is we are multiplying the capacity of energy with renewables, and we are going forward with the frontier of production. And when you invest in a fossil fuel project, it is a lot of capital. You have to recover that investment in 20 years, 30 years. So what are we going to do with the climate? How are we going to stop the emissions if we continue production? So Colombia is actually calling the first diplomatic conference to start talking seriously about what it means to phase out fossil fuels. Because it's not only about the energy transition. It has to do with the balance of trade consequences. It has to do with the fiscal income. It has to do what are we going to do with oil companies from governments that give a lot of the income to government. It has to do with debt. And it has to do with economic development. But we are not talking about that here in COP. And that's why we don't move forward. Because what we talk here is about something around the issue, but not about the issue, which is the fossil capital. What is the problem we're facing now? That fossil capital is taking over in an authoritarian way the democratic governments. And now it's imposing militarily the direction we should go, or two threats. And that's why, for me, the picture of this COP, which I think will be a picture of the 21st century, was the militarization of COP with the indigenous people's protest. Because that's the fence, literal fence, the separation between the people in the front lines and the fossil capital that has taken these negotiations and the governments.
Which is, really a travesty, it has to be said. But just picking up on what you said at the start of your last intervention, this point about the fact that we've added a lot of renewable energy, but we're still adding fossil fuels, for me, is quite clear that we're not really yet in a transition. And the transition means replacing, not adding. And I think the key issue is, how do we get to the stage where we're actually reducing fossil fuels rather than just having more of everything? And the initiative that you've mentioned also dovetails with what Harjeet works on, which is the fossil fuel non-proliferation. I knew I was going to not be able to say that. Non-proliferation treaty initiative, which I think is meeting right now. How, in your view, Harjeet, could Colombia and the FFMPTI work together in order to actually push forward a real transition in the real world, which is what we actually really need?
Thank you, Megan. First of all, can we take a moment to recognize how bold and courageous step Colombia has taken? Right? In the wake of this whole financial and economic turmoil and the political meltdown happening around the world, yet Colombia is standing strong, being so dependent on fossil fuels for revenues, for jobs, yet coming out and saying, we are here to lead. I'm getting goosebumps, I'm not joking, right, while I'm saying it. Because you have countries like UK, Canada, Norway, US, Australia, so much of resource, such historical responsibility, continuing to expand fossil fuels. They are not able to move away from their addiction. The hypocrisy that we see in this space, we stand for 1.5. How? Where is 1.5 target? You blew it away. How? Because you did not act upon it. Look at your domestic emissions. And here there is a country which is dependent on it, with all the political risk that you took domestically, by standing strong and saying we want to move away, there is no global framework that helps us. I think that needs to be recognized. And that's why we have treaty. And Susanna has very clearly laid out why Paris Agreement is not going to be enough. And I really liked what Juan Carlos said. Let's not assume that Paris is going to be enough. Nobody is discarding Paris. But Paris has to be complemented with many other agreements. The comprehensive conversation that we need to have on fossil fuel phase out for all the things that Susanna listed are not going to happen here. This place, I'm sorry, but has become very toxic. What you need to do is to do it outside with a fresh mandate, with countries who are the coalition of willing, who are actually negotiating right now as we speak. The ministerial is happening and there's going to be a high-level event. And they need to come together with that framework, which should work alongside the Paris Agreement. So proponent of the Paris Agreement should not be nervous about it. Right. We need a whole package of those policies and frameworks.
So it looks to me, from what you're saying, that there's an opportunity, and the way we can get action quickly on this is to essentially have a coalition of the willing, countries that really are serious actually about transition away from fossil fuels, working outside of the process. Juan Carlos, is this something that Panama supports? And if so, how do we need to anchor it back into this process? And if so, how?
So I will not call it coalition of the willing, because that phrase is quite overloaded with some political history. But the coalition of those that want, to ensure the promise of life on Earth. Definitely, we need to find innovative ways to get us across the line. And I love what you said about this process being toxic, and it is. It is like the toxic boyfriend or the toxic husband, we are addicted to it. We come every year, we get slapped in the face. He says it's not going to happen again. Next year is going to be more beautiful. We come back, we get slapped again. But we love getting slapped for some reason or the other. So that definitely needs to change. Someone needs to come and have a conversation with those parties. This is not working. You need to find other spaces to be able to move and to be able to progress. And what are other spaces? The negotiations of the plastic treaty, which are also stalled, but plastics, fossil fuel production, and climate change are all the same fight. And you can see that all producers are trying to also block progress on the plastic frontier, because they know that there is also a lot of fossil fuels that needs to be pumped out to produce plastic, and we cannot allow it. So we need to look at this issue at a holistic, comprehensive way. The climate fight is also the biodiversity fight. It's also the ocean conservation fight. It's also the plastic fight. It's just the fight to preserve nature and the promise of life on Earth.
But if we are going to implement a transition away from fossil fuels in the real economy, and I was at an event with lots of research think tank expert types last night, and they were saying one thing that's become massively clear now is that climate is economy. And, as you said, Susanna, it's trade, it's capital investment, it's all of these things. And really, climate has to be totally mainstreamed into that and the other way around as well. But two things that perhaps this process could potentially contribute is work on just transition to help underpin all of this, and finance, right? So without a kind of a perspective or a framework on just transition, and without more finance mobilized, it will be difficult to implement a transition away from fossil fuels. So I'm just wondering, how do you think that this process could actually help with that? Or do you think it's also something that's not going to be possible to achieve within the COP process?
Look, I also think we have to read the signs, because the fossil fuel capital that is taking over governments wants to destroy multilateral agreements. And what happened with the maritime agreement is just absolutely unacceptable. But it's also unacceptable that nobody's standing to defend the willing of many countries that have worked very hard to get to very difficult agreements to put these fees on fossil fuel on shipping, and then one country comes and threats diplomats.
That's the United States.
That's the United States and the Trump fossil fuel capital government. and that it threats diplomats. It is making people got quiet. It's threatening the Caribbean islands that have been a leader. It's silencing people not to talk about this change with threats. And the problem is that we are not standing together against that. How is it possible that a treaty that has been negotiated by hundreds of countries can be stopped by one country threatening the civil public servants directly with their visas, with their families, with their future? And nobody stands up. And this is, look, they are coming to destroy Paris as well.
Although they're not here.
No, but they don't have to be here, and they were not there. They just have to make a call. They just have to silence voices. They just have to say to a country that depends on trade, we have countries in the Caribbean that have been leaders on the finance that cannot speak anymore globally about the finance because they have been threatened. We have the highest mobilization of military of the US in the Caribbean. They have killed 80 Latin Americans in the last 2 months, and nobody says anything. And so we have to talk about that, and we have to unite. If even with it's super imperfect with what we have built, and it's not achieving what we need. But we also have to defend it. That's the paradox. Because the threat is becoming much, much larger, and what I feel there is fear.
Right. Because basically, for example, when the US threatens trade tariffs and all the other things that you've mentioned, countries, don't have much choice but to roll over, and they're definitely on the back foot. And perhaps that's one reason why trade is going to be discussed within the COP process for the first time. The presidency has suggested to set up a forum on trade and climate change, and in the summary note of the consultations that were held last week after countries requested unilateral trade measures to be on the agenda, it looks likely that in the covered decision that will come out from this conference that trade will be included on that. But it's very difficult for this process to actually decide anything on trade. And I'm just wondering, Harjeet, how important do you think it is that at the very least there's this acknowledgement that trade is going to be a big issue, but as Susanna says, it's really such a huge issue. What can be done about it?
Let me make a friendly amendment to what you said, that we are now realizing it's trade. No, we knew that 30 years ago, and the US knew it well ahead of many of us. That's why Senior Bush in early 90s said, referring to the convention, that American lifestyle is not up for negotiation. And trust me, that's exactly the streak that they have been following since then. You find negotiators in the agriculture rooms. Where are they from? Trade. Where are the most aid departments have moved under? Trade. So the developed countries have always even used aid for trade. And they always knew that climate negotiations are for them either to protect their economy or to make more money from it. That's why we don't have climate finance as public finance. Why there is so much of push for private? It has always been about trade. I just wanted to reiterate that. Right from 1992 or even before that, they have been protecting their trade interests. They have been promoting their trade interests. They have fossil fuel companies on their delegations. They have been pushing for private finance. They want to make money of this crisis. We are dying. We are losing our homes. On adaptation, I'll tell you one more specific example. Sorry, Megan. I was at the loss and damage negotiations, the board meeting. You know the language that the developed countries introduced? Let's raise money from capital markets for addressing loss and damage. I'm talking about something that happened a couple of weeks ago. So for them, adaptation is trade, loss and damage is trade, mitigation and fossil fuel, of course, trade.
Obviously, it's all about money. And if you don't mind, I think we'll just talk a little bit now about finance within these negotiations. The adaptation talks that were going on last week were supposed to produce a set of indicators to measure progress on adaptation under the global goal on adaptation, which was included in the Paris Agreement, but 10 years on has still really been not able to achieve very much at all. partly because adaptation has always taken a back seat in the negotiations. But as we know from all the impacts that are happening around the world, clearly we've lost a lot of time on that, and it's going to cost us a lot more. And it's the very reason why we have the loss and damage strand to the negotiations and the fund for responding to loss and damage. But the fund for responding to loss and damage has very little money in it, and there's also a lot of pushback on a proposal from the least developed countries to triple adaptation finance for a new goal, although it is included in the summary note that came out last night. We have no idea whether that's going to be accepted by developed countries, but really just in terms of the bigger picture of the things that you were talking about, trillions and trillions of dollars in trade, and yet countries are finding it hard to land a goal to raise $120 billion in adaptation finance by 2030. What could actually unlock that and get an agreement on adaptation finance here so that we can, agree that really the world needs to do a lot more on that adaptation? Haji, just back to you because I know this is something you've followed. Is it likely, do you think, that we're going to get a goal on tripling adaptation finance here? And if we don't, what does it mean?
If there is no finance, there is no climate action. And if there is no adaptation, we are only going to see more loss and damage. And the reality is that developed countries have been dragging their feet. We are already failing on doubling the adaptation finance target. It should have happened this year. That's what was agreed. And the reason indicators are not being agreed, but because all those 100 indicators, and within that, there are about 9 indicators which are about finance, but most of them are looking at how much domestic finance is being generated. So the pressure is back on developing countries that you do more to adapt. We are just going to be watching. We are not going to be providing support. Rather, we will use these indicators to question you whether you have adapted properly or not. That's exactly the reason indicator...
It's a very kind of paternalistic approach.
Exactly. And that's why now African group of nations and others are saying, hold on, we don't need to agree to the indicators right now. The sequencing has to be right. Provide finance and then talk about how we can adapt and report back. You're asking us to go back, do things and report back without putting any money on the table. So we need grants, we need public finance, we need non-debt creating instruments. That's what we need. If we do not get that, then adaptation talks are going to fail, and I can tell you it's already at risk of failing, and that will be a disaster.
That would be a disaster. It would be a public embarrassment as well for Brazil, who went into this COP saying it would be a COP of adaptation. So I think it's obviously diplomatically very important that they try and achieve something on that. Juan Carlos, what's your view on the adaptation front? And also, today there is an event to raise money for the Adaptation Fund, which is one of the UN climate funds that's done a lot of pioneering work on adaptation. From the NCQG, the climate finance goal that came out of Baku last year, there was also within that a goal to triple outflows from the UN climate funds by 2030. And I think that's an issue that's important for Panama. So if you could expand on that a little bit and tell us how you think that could evolve in this coming week.
Yes, so for a bit of context, the global goal on climate finance that we agree upon, well, quote unquote agree, in the previous COP in Baku, does not have direct mentions of grant-based and provision of public sources. That is why that fight is so important when we're requesting the tripling of adaptation finance. When we got to Glasgow back in 2021, adaptation finance was around $20 billion a year. We managed to raise up the ambition and to ask for a doubling it to $40 billion. Yet, we still don't see those $40 billion. However, following the same logic that we follow in Baku, if the global goal on finance was 100 billion, we triple it to 300 billion, then the same should at least happen to adaptation. But it cannot only be debt instruments. Even though Panama is open to the idea and to pilots on bankable adaptation programs, the big component of this finance needs to come from grant sources. Why? We're a carbon negative nation. We have been carbon negative since we became a country. We did not create any little drop towards this climate crisis. Why should I, as Panama, be requesting loans to help my people adapt? Why should any Caribbean nation that did not really contribute to this issue be requesting high interest loans to adapt? So that is why the conversation is more than just tripling the amount, but also what kind of money are we getting? Because it cannot only be debt instruments.
Yes, there's been, I think, a lot of pressure or expectation that the multilateral development banks are going to come in and basically help to meet these targets that were set. And, you know, those are essentially, okay, concessional, but it's loans, it's debt. And, you know, at the moment, donor governments are not showing their hands at all in terms of the amounts of climate finance that they're prepared to come up with beyond this year, over the next 5 years, for example. And they're all sort of saying, well, they're having to spend a lot more money on military, for example, being told to do so by the United States. And they're all using that as kind of a, you know, hiding behind that. And basically, for example, the UK came here with an expectation to put $1 billion behind the Tropical Forest Forever facility, and just came empty-handed, which was quite shocking, having worked on the design of it and everything. But just going back to the adaptation finance and so on and so forth, and the need for it to be grant-based and not loans. Susanna, you've done quite a lot of work on innovative finance sources, debt for nature swaps, and there's also these a lot of discussions around levies that could be put on things like aviation, carbon markets, fossil fuel producers, financial transaction taxes, you name it. Do you think this is a realistic way that money could flow for adaptation?
Look, we need public money. And how do governments get public money? By taxing. That's the way you do it. And so we put in Azerbaijan the Baku to Belém roadmap as a way of allowing the convention to work on how we were going to go to the 1.3 trillion, so that it's not only an aspirational goal, which is what they always do, no? It's like a mirror, like say, distraction mirror, like, oh, you have the 1.3 trillion, we're going to go with the 300,000 million, okay, that's fine, but then you forget about the 1.3 trillion. So the expert commission has worked, the report is out, and it has technically a roadmap of how to get to 1.3 trillion. It was presented yesterday. It has a comprehensive set of measures, including levies to aviation, including the issue of debt, not debt in terms of swaps, but is redefining debt in the climate crisis era, so that it can become a way to open fiscal space for government, including taxing financial transactions. And this could raise actually 1.3 trillion that could go to the multilateral funds that we have already created in this convention, so that there is plenty of money. I have heard one country, I will not say the name, saying, oh, no, but that will be too much money. Of course. But now they don't want to tax the aviation business, because then they have the lobby from the aviation. So again, you don't give the tools and you don't want to give the money. So that doesn't work. So there is no excuse. We can raise the money to address these issues. It can be public money. It can go to the fund, to the multilateral funds, and it can go directly to communities, as indigenous peoples are asking, and also it can go to fiscal space of government directly for climate action. We do have the strategies. Are the interests of the fossil fuel capital going to allow these levies, this taxation? And then you don't see appetite. But in 2 seconds, they increase their GDP military expenditure to 5% of GDP. And then, why is that? Because everybody's happy to pursue the military industry that produces billions of dollars, pushed by the US government that is trying to push its military industry.
The money is there, it's just being spent on utterly the wrong things. I just would also like to address the question of fossil fuel subsidies, right, which is, you know, trillions of dollars, essentially. Do you think, as part of discussions on a transition away from fossil fuels, that anything concrete can be done on fossil fuel subsidies? Because we get promises from the G20, we get promises from the G7 that they will stop inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and then we get absolutely no action on this whatsoever. Do you think that Colombia would be able to try and do something to actually hold countries to account on what they have promised in these G20 and G7 about, stopping or phasing out, I can't remember the language exactly, on fossil fuel subsidies? Because that would really, really help with this issue if that money was then put towards a green economy and helping people suffering from climate change impacts.
It is a very difficult social negotiation, but it's possible. We did it with gasoline. We don't subsidize now, zero subsidy to gasoline, and we liberated space. And actually, the main driver was not directly the environmental driver. It was because we didn't have money in the government. You cannot continue paying for that. It was billions of pesos. Now, for the diesel, we went through a strike with food trucks, and we got a negotiation, and we were able to get to 50% reduction, and they agreed to have the transition on the trucks, the energy transition on the trucks, as a way that we can liberate the other 50%. So it is a negotiation, but it needs to have democratic negotiation, and that's the other point of this process. It has closed to the democratic deliberations. We don't hear here the voices of the people at the front line of the climate crisis. That's why they have to interrupt the conference and come by force. We are in the Amazon. Where is the talking point in the agenda about the Amazon? This Amazon issue of being here cannot just be an issue of being in a setting. The Amazon is not a setting, it's a pillar of climate crisis. It can be a solution or it can be a disaster, and it's actually becoming a disaster. And the people that are the owners of this territory, that have the knowledge that can change this story for humanity, were not able really to participate. And this is not minor, because we get into these technocratic discussions, but if it is not talked democratically with the people, what's going to happen? That the people, the far right, is now saying that environmental conventions and environment is an elitist discussion. And then they are mobilizing the people against environmental measures. Not because because they have a real situation. Environmental measures in many countries are not including the base to benefit the most vulnerable people that are affected in the transition.
Right.
So we should have here in the table of negotiation the workers of the fossil fuel industry, the agricultural people, the peasants that need to make the transition of the agribusiness. Everybody has to have a seat in the table, and the process is not designed like that.
Right.
And so who has a seat in the table is the fossil fuel capital.
Yeah.
This is not minor. It's a core of what we discuss, what decisions we take, and what effect they made.
Absolutely. If it doesn't have democratic legitimacy, then, really, can it actually happen outside of here? Juan Carlos.
Yes, I just want to come back to this issue of the money. There is enough money in the economy to finance all of this. It is all about priorities, and it's all about political will. And yes, we need more money, and we're fighting for it, but we also need to improve the access to the money that's already on the table. There is already money on the table, but it's so cumbersome to get to it. The financial mechanism of the convention has the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environmental Fund, and others. But if I want to request $1 million from each one of them, I need to knock on 3 different doors. 3 different doors that have completely different application standards, review standards, and reporting standards. So we as countries literally have to develop corps of consultants that specialize on each fund just to try to access those funds. And once we access them, it can take us up to 10 years to get a project. The biggest finance that we have from the Green Climate Fund is a regional project. It literally took us 8 years to negotiate and get this project. I mean, by the time that the money comes, either the problem has resolved or the communities are already underwater. So it is just ridiculous that we have to knock on so many doors, and this is also one of the priorities of the negotiations of Panama, to harmonize and streamline access to what we already have on the table. And what Susana was mentioning on the importance of having the voices of the frontline defenders, it's just of utmost importance and ridiculous that they are not here. For example, on Saturday, you know, Chief Brownie, which is one of the most prominent figures in the indigenous world, he was here at COP30 for an event at the Blue Zone because the leaders from his community requested us, the delegation of Panama, to please help them find this space. How the heck Chief Brownie did not have a space at COP30 to channel his vision? This is the biggest defender of the Amazonia. Of course, you know, when we received that request, we moved heaven on earth to make it possible within 24 hours. But that should not be an afterthought. That should be the first thing that we think about. The frontline workers, the workers of fossil fuel, the workers of the agribusiness that also need to transition away from what they're doing, but we need to give them options. We need to give them tools.
Harjeet,
Yeah,
sure you have
that's
thoughts on that.
exactly the reason I go back to the same point, that this agreement, this setting is not conducive to actually get all the voices in. We need to be innovative. We need to be looking at outside and create those alternative arrangements and working in conjunction with the Paris Agreement. And I want to repeat, let's not get nervous about that we are discarding Paris Agreement. We'll protect this space, we'll strengthen it, but we need something from the outside to make sure all the voices are in. Going to finance, we have allowed the fossil fuel industry to profit at the rate of $2.8 billion per day. $2.8 billion per day over the last 50 years. We are talking about $7 trillion worth of subsidy, which amounts to $13 million per minute. And then we talk about inefficient subsidies. There's no definition of insufficient subsidies, inefficient subsidies. What is the definition, right? In some cases, we do recognize that consumers need that support. But most of the subsidy goes to producers. How do you look at that? We have not diagnosed the topic well enough so that we can actually act upon it. I think that is very important. And some of our friends who we work very closely with on Make Polluters Pay campaign are also saying, you know, yes, we need to make polluters pay, but also stop paying polluters. We are paying polluters in the form of subsidies and allowing them to make profits, when what we should be doing is to make polluters pay for climate action. So that's challenging. And on your point related to access, oh God, I mean, we celebrated the day one, the launch of the proposals from the FRLD, Loss and Damage Fund. It's not yet a rapid response fund. So you're talking about transition and other actions taking 10 years. You are drowning and you are supposed to write a proposal. That's what Loss and Damage Fund has become. It should be a rapid response fund. Yes, it needs to do more on rehabilitation and reconstruction because humanitarian community is unable to, and we are not displacing the humanitarian community. But they don't have sufficient money. Look at the disasters that have multiplied and intensified. And you are saying that you will write a proposal, we'll give you 6 months, and then we will review it, and then we'll give you money to address loss and damage. So there's a lot that needs to be done on the access side.
Absolutely. I would like to ask two big questions to finish. One is just following on from the things that we've been talking about, is how can you make things work better inside this process so that it can actually serve the people on the ground outside who are not in here better. I'll ask each of you in turn, what do you think would really change the game in order for the UN climate process to serve the people better on the outside? Let's start with Susanna.
For me, the answer is democracy and opening the process so that first people can understand what is discussed here. Even the language in this space is not understandable, even for people at the government itself. It's just full of acronyms, it's full of language that has become super technocratic. Negotiators are out of touch with reality. They have become a bubble within their own language, and they have a mindset. And I cannot believe I have heard here negotiators from countries that have listened to the speeches of presidents. And when you bring the political direction, then the negotiators said, no, that's the political. That should be the negotiation. If President Lula says, who's the host and president of this country and the host of COP, that we need a roadmap to phase out fossil fuels, we cannot have civil servants saying that was just a political speech. That should be the main negotiation. So there is a disconnect with people, and there is a disconnect of political direction with what actually is negotiated. And finally, I will make a call for union around multilateralism. that we cannot accept bullying, and hopefully we can have a push by civil society to change the rule of consensus, which has become a veto process that doesn't allow to solve the climate issue.
Thank you. Juan Carlos, you're head of delegation. You are very much involved in the negotiations, but you're also somebody who's very able to communicate what's going on in here to the outside world. And I heard that in Baku, and I'm hearing that here. How do you think this can be addressed, this disconnect between what the negotiators see that they need to be working on and what the politicians say and the people?
So the first step to get away from the toxic husband is to actually understand the truth that he's toxic, and to internalize it. And what are other truths? The truth is that we're not headed to the right direction. The truth is, as Susana mentioned, that we're paying criminals to kill us. That's literally what happens when we give oil producers subsidies to continue producing. We give the money to criminals so that they continue to kill us, sometimes slowly, sometimes fast. The truth is that that consensus kills ambition. I mean, there is no way that we will actually get the results that we want if we continue operating on the same system that brought us to this point. These conventions have 33 years since they were created. I was born, went to elementary school, high school, university, graduated, started as a climate analyst 10 years ago. Now I'm the special envoy from my nation. I'm 33, and we're still having the same conversation. So we need a reform of the system, not only here in the climate convention, but across the multilateral system. Because there are inefficiencies, there are duplicities, there are structures that simply don't operate, and we need to pick those that actually give results and mainstream that vision across the whole multilateral system. I think that even though there are countries that have sort of like pulled out from the processes, this thing on reforming the system is something that every country can agree on. Both the access to the funds, both the common reporting framework across conventions so that we don't drown under paperwork, and also, thirdly, that would be more difficult, ending the consensus. I mean, consensus is the cancer that is killing results here in this convention and across Rio conventions.
I think there is a lot of talk about that. And in fact, the UNFCCC, the UN climate change body, is consulting with experts on reforms. And they say that they're going to bring the results of those consultations to the countries, or parties as they're called here, next year. So I think there is at least some recognition of that at the higher level in the UN. But whether that will actually lead to anything concrete, we still don't know. Harjeet, how about your views on that?
I will start with what Susana said. That was going to be my point as well. And the irony is to throw away the rule of moving away from consensus-based decision. For that also you need a consensus.
Well, quite. How do we get there?
So I mean, that's the irony we are dealing with. And I would say, building on what Juan Carlos and Susana said, put people and their interest at the center. And I'm saying their interest because you have put people in the form of, indigenous platform and community level this and that. You get a speaking slot of 1 minute and you're speaking to the empty room. We will give you a space at 2 a.m. in the morning when everybody is gone. So you have that space. So, this is an eyewash. Please be genuine about protecting people's interest, and don't create hoops and loops of processes to say that you are addressing. We have lost 33 years. We have just lost 33 years. We are living in a world which is 1.6 degree warmer. Disasters are everywhere, not just in developing countries alone, even in the developed world. It's not only us in the developing world who are now suffering. People in the developed world are also choosing between heating and eating. That's the reality. We need to get united. It's not developing countries versus developed countries. It's we versus 1% or now 0.1%. I think we need to call out those oligarchs and those corporations who are profiting from this crisis, who are responsible for this crisis. And we need to change the process where we move away from blame game and hypocrisy to actually look at the real life situation, real action. Let us appreciate who is doing good work. Let us acknowledge, let us adopt the true spirit of international cooperation. We need multilateralism more than ever, more than ever. We are facing multiple crises. not just climate, biodiversity crisis, right? Environmental crisis, inequality, energy crisis. Come on, we need to come together as one community, as really one global community.
Thanks so much. And given what you've all said here today, my last question may seem a little bit, well, I don't know. I don't know how much you would really expect this process to produce here in Belém by the end of this week. In terms of what we can actually expect from what you have all said appears to be, a flawed process and in need of reform. But still, each COP decisions are made, and that does set the political direction for the next year, for governments, for negotiators, and it continues. Given all the discussions we've had about the bigger picture and the difficulties of reflecting that here, I would just like to ask all of you in turn, what would you really hope and expect to come out of this space by the end of this week? Realistically speaking, what can we see? How can Brazil land something that will actually help with all the problems that we've been discussing here today? Juan Carlos.
I think there are three things that we can get out of this COP. The roadmap to end deforestation. I mean, if we don't get a roadmap to end deforestation at the Amazonia COP, we will never get it. Let's just talk plainly. If we don't get it this week, we will never get it. Number two, the harmonization of access and disbursement to the financial mechanisms of the convention. And number three, a decision on synergies. We cannot continue drowning countries on reports while communities are facing so many impacts, and then bureaucrats don't have time to take care of these communities because they need to comply with the reports. I think these are 3 points where we still have, time to get to a consensus, and I believe we're going to get there. Hope is not a feeling. Hope is a decision. It's a political decision. And every morning we need to tell that to ourselves, because if we leave it to feelings, we will be depressed in bed. But we are here because we believe something is still possible.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree very much with the issue of deforestation. I hope that we can get the adaptation finance and also the roadmap adopted from Baku to Belém on the 1.3 trillion, with all those measures to push for the structural financial change and the roadmap for transitioning away of fossil fuels.
Well, one thing that did happen, or two positive things happened in the first week. One, of course, Colombia's leadership to call for a roadmap and working towards it. We really want this to be agreed. And we don't want a long road to a roadmap. We need an actual roadmap.
Yeah, I was going to say, what can actually be agreed? Just an agreement to start working on a roadmap?
No work program, please. No roundtable conversations, please. We need a roadmap and not a long road to a roadmap. And I repeat that. Second, Just Transition Work Program now needs to transform into what we are calling Belém Action Mechanism, or BAM, right? And G77 in China has picked up that civil society proposal. There's a lot of excitement around it. Because let's face it, what Colombia is asking for, or where Philippines or Malaysia or India or Indonesia are stuck, they need a just transition framework so that they can transition and to address all the issues Susanna mentioned earlier of debt and interest of workers. That's what we are calling for. And now G77 has picked up that proposal. I think we need to stay strong and really get it. That will enable and unlock all the action for phasing out fossil fuels and also all other sectors that need that transition support. And of course, without finance, we will not be able to move everything. So we really want to turn that roadmap. Let me say one more line. You agree there are a lot of good elements in the roadmap and things that have been done in the past. We need to curate that roadmap. We need to now turn that into a plan and say, this is what we need to do, but who is going to do what and when and how? That is missing. Can we work on it this week?
Absolutely. Okay, so adaptation, finance, just transition, and a roadmap away from fossil fuels. Those are some of the key, and deforestation as well. Just a small number of things that we need to make progress on by the end of this week. I would just like to thank my guests. We've lost Juan Carlos because this is Monday morning. It's super busy. There's lots going on, lots to play for, and I'm sure you also need to escape as well. So thank you so much for your insights, and yeah, good luck for the rest of the week. Thank you.